You've entered Bookstorm with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to Bookstorm Podcast. All of you book lovers, you know Kristen and I are bringing you the very best fiction and the very best authors. We have a writing team with us here today. I'm going to start with one word, Tom Clancy. 40 years ago, you remember The Hunt for Red October. Fast forward, now we've got Brian Andrews and Jeffrey Wilson taking the legacy to new heights. And I'm going to add new depths because we're talking about submarines here today. We're thrilled to have both of you. Welcome to Bookstorm.
Thanks for having us. I see what you did there, new depths. That was good.
Well, I'm going to tell our listeners a little bit about both of you because both of you guys are pretty cool and very fascinating background. Yes, I said they're the writing team behind quite a few bestsellers. We've got Tier 1, Sons of Valor, and the Shepherd book series that Kristen and I just ordered. Brian is a nuclear engineer and Park Leadership Fellow who served as an officer on a fast attack submarine. Wow. Then we've got Jeff, who's a vascular surgeon, a jet pilot who conducted combat operations with an East Coast SEAL team. No wonder this book is so legitimate and authentic. We knew there was something going on here. And as if this isn't enough, they have multiple film and television projects under development with Skydance, Picture Start, Walden Media, Imagine Television, Sony, Fifth Season, Cross Pictures, and more. Now, we have a lot of mutual friends, we're proud to say, guests on Bookstorm Podcast that we're big fans of that have endorsed this book. We've got Nick Petrie and we've got Don Bentley. And I've got to sum up what Don said because he said it best. If Tom Clancy were still alive, this would be the book he'd write. It's simply magnificent. Yes, Don, Kristen and I couldn't agree more. We're thrilled to have Brian and Jeff with us here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much
for having us.
Brian, it sounds like Don earned his $50, so that's good.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't, not actual cash. We give him those Starbucks gift cards, remember? So you can only get coffee, but
he's such a nice guy. I'm sure.
We love Don.
Oh, well, Brian and Jeff, we like to give our listeners a little bit of the background of the book that we're here to discuss today, which is the newest installment in the Tom Clancy series. This one is Act of Defiance. And I'm going to say for our listeners, first of all, right from the get-go, this is a throwback. This goes back to all the things that we love about the Tom Clancy books. And I started reading them when I was, I think, 15 with my father. And so to me, I read it. I was just cheering as I was reading it along. Chris and I have been talking about that. So I'm going to give a little bit of a summary. And if you'd like to add anything, we'd love for you to do that. I will not give away spoilers, which is a little bit tricky here. So I'm going to be very careful. Now, in this story, U.S. intelligence has learned some very interesting information. We have a Russian sub, a very deadly submarine. It's kind of an enhanced version of some existing submarine classes that they have. And I want to make sure I'm pronouncing this right. The Belgorod or Belgorod? Belgorod. It has unexpectedly launched, and now people on the U.S. side are wondering what is going on. It was a blip on their radar for just a short time, but now they're wondering, why has this departed? What is its mission? And it has some interesting configurations, including some very large doors. No one's even sure what those are for, but now everybody is concerned. It has been 4 decades since a similar incident had happened with the Red October. And way back then, we had an operative named, he has a CIA analyst named Jack Ryan. And his involvement, of course, was the story that launched the series, and it was fascinating. But now, 4 decades later, he's the president, Jack Ryan is. He now, of course, commands fleets of ships. He's got jets under his command and teams of SEALs. And his adult children are all working in different capacities, including his daughter, who is now working with naval intelligence. And that has been a really interesting aspect of this story. Perhaps it falls to a younger generation of Ryans to do something different to protect the United States, to protect the world. I don't know. But in this story, we know that there's always a price to be paid for this information and for the responses the US launches. And there's times where Jack Ryan is very torn because now he's got his adult children, he's got his character, his legacy on the line. Would you like to add anything to that summary?
Oh my gosh, first of all, we need to hire you to write all the synopses.
I'm
was
here.
that was perfect. Nothing to add, but it was fun for me. And I think Brian too, that you keyed into some really cool elements that we were highly intentional about. The relationship between being a father and the president, and the relationship between Jack and his daughter, Katie, was really, really fun, but required a lot of work to find the right balance. So I'm so excited that you keyed into that.
Excellent. Well, we're going to dive into that deeper, I'm sure. I think Chris then is going to kick us off.
Yeah, no, okay. First, I have to say, yes, I loved Hunt for Red October in 1904, but I was a lot older than 15. I can't believe I'm actually admitting it, but it's true. No, I read somewhere the extensive research in this book was mind blowing. And I read that you were granted elite access. Of course, with your backgrounds, you have a lot of knowledge. But I have to say thank you from the reader, because we learned a lot through this story.
And I think one of the things that Tom Clancy was known about is, he was never, he had a dream of service. He wanted to serve, but due to eyesight and requirements in the 1980s, he was not able to serve. So he ended up becoming an insurance salesman, but this was his passion. And so, he spent years researching the Hunt for Red October, and he went straight to subject matter experts. And we actually got to talk with a few of them from back in the day. So that was kind of cool. But, we're the first Navy veterans to write in the Clancy series ever. And so for us, it was really important that we wanted to do a pivot back to sort of the roots of Clancy, these big Navy books with lots of research. So we reached out to the Navy at the very beginning and said, hey, we have a big opportunity here to write a submarine book on the 40th anniversary for the Hunt for Red October, and would Navy be willing to help us? And they were like, absolutely, whatever you guys need.
Wow. That had to be so fun, going in there and talking to them and learning everything that's changed in this amount of time. And I want to say for our listeners, I do remember that Ronald Reagan at the time endorsed this book by Tom Clancy in 1984. And I love, fast forward 40 years, you're taking us back there, because war is a lot different now and technology is a lot different now. Leads into my first question. So one man, I'm not going to say who, I don't want to give spoilers, talking about nuclear war, because that's a hot topic even today. It's a real threat. He said, what am I doing? Do I have the right to wield this power? Who am I to change the fate of man? Another one said, we have attained the greatest technological advances in history. But I had to ask you, as Navy veterans, as military people, as the researchers and authors, how much is technology when it comes to embarkation of war, strategy, and the winning of war? And how much is it this? I'm taking this quote from the book: conscience, mettle, and honor of man. What's the determining factor?
Yeah, and isn't it funny that 40 years later, that exact same question could have been asked in 1984, different technology, right? But it seems like we always come back to that. And that's that human element. Brian and I had a wonderful opportunity to write a book about artificial intelligence last year. And so we were in that mindset of where is that intersection between humanity and technology, and what happens if we lose it? And so when it comes to technology, whether it's, the Cold War in the 80s and early 90s and the threat of nuclear war, or now with artificial intelligence and, we have remote piloted drones and we can drop drone bombs on bad guys. If you separate man and humanity from warfare too much, I fear that that is going to cause more war, not less, because it sterilizes it. The horror of war is what makes it something to be avoided. And without that, I think that our leaders are going to be a little hair trigger more than I would like. And so I'm glad that you picked up on that, because that is something that we very much wanted to weave into this book through Jack Ryan's perspective as president. You saw these discussions a little bit in some of the, situation room discussions, but also all the way down to the level of the operator in John Clark and Katie Ryan as she does what she does in the book. That idea that there has to be humanity involved in warfare to make it something to be avoided. So it's really cool to me, Chris, that you picked up on that.
Brian, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I mean, I think, throughout the entire Cold War, there was this premise of mutually assured destruction. It was this idea that, well, they wouldn't launch at us because they know we would launch at them. And I think it was President Kennedy that said, I hope the Russians love their kids as much as we love ours, because that Jeff was just keying in on it. It's like, the humanity of it, the idea that you would destroy not military targets, but an entire country, an entire civilization, all the civilians through these weapons of mass destruction is so horrific that was sort of the stopping point. And I think what we've seen recently, which is what is disturbing with Russian rhetoric and propaganda, is just this idea that, well, maybe they'd be willing to go there if you push them too far. And so that propaganda, that fear mongering, I mean, the Russian president released a PowerPoint video that showed the weapon that we feature in this book causing a nuclear torpedo tidal wave tsunami wiping out the state of Florida. Why would he do that? Why would they show that? It's to intimidate, it's to create fear. And so I think, it's our responsibility as storytellers to maybe provide some context and color to the types of things that are happening in the real world right now.
It was fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to ask you about another theme, that idea of legacy that we alluded to earlier. And to me, in this whole thrill ride, that was something that kept leaping out at me over and over. Now, first, I'm going to preface that with my father and I, a father and daughter, we shared a love of Tom Clancy books. And so that was something that I always bonded with my late father over. And so it was very, special to me just in that regard. But in your story, we also see a legacy between a Russian father and son. We see the idea of legacy with the president and his adult daughter, and really the rest of the Ryan family. And also, we see these throwbacks to the original premise of the story throughout your writing, with your style, the depth of detail. I thought that was another aspect of legacy that you tackled. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about the impact of what comes before and how important it is when it informs our values today. Because as you were talking, I was thinking about ideology being kind of a bigger issue than it was 40 years ago, and some of those values may not be central. What do you think?
Well, that's an amazingly well-framed question, especially when you're, given the opportunity to write in what we sort of sometimes refer to as a legacy series, right? So, we're tasked with the responsibility, really, to carry on Tom Clancy's legacy and everything that he contributed to the genre that he essentially invented, right? And so the idea of legacy, I think, was weighing on us throughout this. And I wonder if maybe, Brian, maybe unconsciously, that's why some of this legacy stuff came out. I mean, part of it was craft, right? Part of it was tying the new to the old, because I think that the challenge of writing legacy works is to find that tipping point between nostalgia without retreading and new without giving up the old, like you're just saying there, Kristen. So it's a fascinating issue from the creative craft standpoint. But I think that even more so when you start to talk about how it reflects the real world now, this idea of wanting to go back. If you look at Putin, for example, it's pretty obvious that there are people, perhaps Putin himself within the Russian government, who would love to go back to the Soviet style and what they considered prestige of that superpower that they long for. And so trying to pull that legacy into their political decisions, into the way they do warfare, that zero-sum game that we talk about a little bit in the book, that is a Russian Soviet era mindset that you still see. There's some more legacy. So pulling the legacy together creatively while also trying to reflect the real world of where we are now and the legacy of the submarine force. We really wanted to show how amazing these men and women are now, and show and honor that sacrifice that they and their families make, while still showing the legacy of how they got there. And Brian is the perfect one for that, having been a submarine officer back in the day. So I love that question. Brian, what do you have to add? I know I missed something.
No, I mean, I think you really covered the big points. We could talk a little bit about just how the submarine community has changed over the years. When I was a submarine officer, it was an all-male fleet. There were no women serving aboard submarines, and now it's a mixed crew. So when we had the opportunity to go out to sea on the USS Indiana, there's female officers, female enlisted aboard, and they're kicking butt, doing the job just as well as the men. So, that's an evolution. The platform has evolved. When I was a submarine officer, I'm on a periscope, a physical periscope, holding on to the handles, turning it around. We had a helmsman and a plainsman and a chief of the watch and a diving officer. There's 4 people, and they're manually controlling everything. You go aboard the Virginia class submarine today, it's a non-penetrating periscope. They're taking the ship to periscope depth, looking at a television stick, using an Xbox controller to rotate the periscope. You've got a pilot and a co-pilot, and they can touch the screen and enter the depth and enter the course, and the ship will turn and dive itself. So there's a lot more technology. So in some senses, maybe you feel this sort of disconnect from the platform or from the ocean, from the mission. But on the other hand, with these additional capabilities, you're safer, you're stealthier, you're more tactical than you were before. So with these evolutionary elements, I think the community itself has raised its game, but the missions that they're doing are still very much the same as the legacy missions, which is blue water, submarine on submarine type of activities, littoral surveillance, intelligence collection, escorting and protecting the battle group. These core elements still exist. And so it was cool to showcase that component of legacy. Okay, these are the missions that we saw in Hunt for Red October. We're still doing the same missions, but we have more tools, a different mix of crew, and a more capable platform than we did before.
Yeah. As you were speaking, Brian, I was also thinking about another aspect of legacy that came through in your story, and that is this idea of these radioactive isotopes and the fact that that's a legacy of 5.4 billion years, for example, talking about plutonium. So
Yeah.
that was something that was an underlying threat, as always in the series, but just throughout this book, that was very well done because it brought home that understanding of what we do now affects later, and our children and our children's children. Very well done.
Very well said.
Thank
I have
you.
to go back on all the new submarines that are being made, because there was a quote in the book that said every sub has unique acoustic fingerprint.
Mhm.
Is that something new, or was that going on 40 years ago?
That's been going on from the beginning of the submarines tracking submarines. So, one of the things, just like all humans, we have our physical characteristics, our fingerprints. These submarines are built by people, and they operate, and things break and things get repaired. And so as much as, the assembly line of making a submarine, as much as you'd like it to be all identical, the reality is there's variation from submarine to submarine. And as they operate, what happens is, things break, things get repaired. sound tile falls off the hull, whatever, the propeller runs over something and gets scarred. And so what happens is that's a way, since you can't see, a lot of people think that there's windows on submarines. Maybe they're imagining like, you know, a tourist submarine or these James Cameron ones that goes down and finds it's a Titanic. That's not what our submarines look like. They're complete still hull, no windows. You cannot see out of them. I mean, even if you could, you're so deep that it's dark and there'd be nothing to see. So sound is, you know, providing the vision for the submarine. And so we have acoustic specialists that are always listening. You remember Jonesy from the movie Hunt for Red October, and he's listening, and he's the one that picks up something sounds different, you know, something I've never heard before. And that is still true today.
That was very interesting. Now, I also love this idea of parity in the book. One person said, there's a beautiful stability in parity. 2 superpowers in the world. Time for a new Cold War. We need to weaken America. I thought about this idea of parity a long while. We have this in our own political parties in this country. We have 2 sides. Sometimes parity gives us a voice. It gives us a little balance. But as writers and researchers, how is parity a danger on a global scale? Now we don't have 2 superpowers. We have many. We have enemies hidden and scattered across the world in discrete places. Does parity still fit today? Would it ever suffice?
Wow, what an interesting question. I mean, I think that, first of all, we tend to frame things in our own mindset. You know, we talk about how anthropomorphic it is to say, oh, you know, my dog loves this or my dog hates that, because dogs don't think and feel the way we do, right? Although I think our dogs do, but so it's similarly anthropomorphic to take a conversation like parity and try to evaluate your enemy through the eyes of what you believe and your values, because they often are not the same. You know, back in the Cold War, and continuing through today in Russia, you see that this idea, and we fleshed this out in the book, I mentioned it earlier, the idea of the zero-sum game. In America, in our culture, the win-win scenario, that's the most desirable outcome, right? That's what we should always want. Even with people that we're competing against, that's the best situation. But that's not the Soviet mindset, and that's old legacy Soviet mindset has crept into the modern Russian thinking of their politics, where the zero-sum game is you know, their mindset. They win when we lose. They can't be a win-win. It's got to be we're better and you're worse. And now in the modern world with terrorism and jihadi and stuff like that, it's even more so. It dwarfs what we think of in the old Soviet mindset. So it's an interesting question to talk about parity, but maybe superfluous, because parity only works if we all view it the same way, if we're all coming at it from a similar mindset and have similar values and that sort of thing. So I do think that it's something that human beings tend to seek out, parity and equality and stuff like that. And that's a good thing. But politically and geopolitically, it can be a stumbling block to clear thought if you don't really understand how your enemy views that, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I was kind of hoping you would say that. I think that we are human beings who like parity. We're used to parity, good, bad, right, wrong, left, right. Everything, even in our bodies, have one side and another side. So maybe it's the tidy mind that hopes that parity would be a solution. But I think you gave a good answer. It's not. Some people will never be satisfied with it. It's not. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I think that we are naturally programmed to want to compare ourselves. We constantly are doing this sort of relative comparison to sort of give ourselves a sense of where we stand. And I think in military arms races, that bleeds over. And so you look and you say, well, okay, their fleet has these capabilities, so we need to make sure we have the same capabilities, and let's try to just elevate ourselves. So we have some more ships, better missiles, better radar, then we will be above them and they'll have to catch up to us. And then we'll be working to stay ahead while they're catching up. And so I think that there's maybe a certain sense of security. There's so much uncertainty in the world, and human beings, we hate uncertainty. So I think maybe that's the reason why we start and say, okay, well, how do I compare to them? And if I'm a little bit better, I feel okay, I feel I can relax a little bit. And what we see with every conflict is that parity is very quickly disrupted, because human beings are quite ingenious and creative, and we're very good at finding ways to upset the apple cart, so to speak. We've seen it even in the Ukraine war, right? We've seen at the beginning of the Ukraine conflict, Russia performing very badly. And everyone thought, oh, wow, they don't have the capabilities that we thought they did. And they didn't. But now, 2 years later, they have constantly been improving, and they've started to turn the tide because they've made adjustments. And so anytime you engage the enemy in real world situations, that sort of jockeying for advantage is inevitable.
Yeah.
So true.
But that idea of parity has taken on a new meaning in the environmental context. And that is third world countries saying, you got to pollute for so long. Now it's
Yeah.
our turn. Right. It's a very
Right.
interesting
Yeah,
concept.
what a great example. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's another thematic element I wanted to ask you about, because again, all puns aside, this was a deep book. And it was this idea of communism versus capitalism. And I want to read this quote from the book because this was great. This was a dangerous time in Russia, and one could not be too careful. Friends, enemies, confidants, traitors, titles were changed in the blink of an eye in Russia. This was the downside of capitalism, but also its strength. Now, you really explored, to me, this tension between, is it even possible to have pure communism in a day and age where people can be bought off and make more money if they turn traitor? Why was that important in this story, that tension there?
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool that you picked it. You want to start that one, Brian?
It's funny because you and I were just talking about
I
that
know.
this morning.
I was just laughing about that.
I mean, I think with communism, the idea, some of the principles at their most basic level make sense. Let's have an organization, a governmental structure, a political structure where, wealth doesn't determine your success, or influence doesn't determine your success. We're all valued as individuals. But I mean, I think what we've seen with every form of government, and we're starting to see it, even, well, not starting, we've seen it, we've been watching it in the democracy of America too, is that, any time that a human being is in a position of power, corruption is going to follow. And so I'm not saying everyone is corrupt in leadership and government, but that temptation is there. And so even in communism, we've seen now under Putin, they're not communists, but he has, I saw this little factoid. In the last 2 years, Putin has erected 190 new statues of Stalin. Why is he doing that? He's hearkening back to the day of the ultimate communist dictator. So, was Russia ever truly communist? I think the argument could be made no. It was just a poor oligarchy back then, and it's still an oligarchy today. And so the idea of communism, you could make an argument that it was propaganda all along. It's never been anything but propaganda. So we were sort of kicking that idea around.
Yeah, and the why of that is literally what we were talking about 4 hours ago. The why of why it was really propaganda, not a true political movement. And the answer to the why is because people were involved. Like, the reason communism, true pure communism, could never work is because people are involved. and so that's why it probably was mostly true communism means everyone is equal. Everyone is decidedly equal. You don't have to prove your equality. By being born, we're all equal. And so in pure communism, then everyone should have exactly the same things and exactly the same opportunities and exactly the same success. And the government's job is just simply to distribute that. The problem is the people in the government are people, and those people are subject to corruption. And so communism, as we saw it in the Soviet Union, and it's particularly interesting to me because I grew up in Berlin at the height of the Cold War. So I was living in West Berlin and seeing Checkpoint Charlie and walking along the wall and seeing these German border guards. So it's something I've thought about my whole life. the communism of the Soviet Union was exactly like, in my opinion, what Brian just said. It was a propaganda tool to control the people. If you keep us in power, we will make sure you won't ever see corrupt government like those wily Americans with their capitalism, where only the wealthy succeed. But what they replaced it with was only the powerful succeed. And so it was just really truly a lie. Communism in the Soviet Union was never true communism. I think that if it was achievable by removing people, you could almost make an argument, and I'm a capitalist, but you could almost make an argument that communism would be an amazing form of utopian society. But I'm a capitalist because there's people involved. And hard work should, if I work harder, I should have more because I worked harder. You shouldn't get the same thing I do if you don't do anything. And so that's the problem with the communist model, and why I think, like Brian wisely said, it was really a propaganda tool to control people.
Yeah. I kept thinking about North Korea when you were talking, and this idea of power and then perpetuating that power. And I tend to agree with you there. Very interesting. Well, I honestly wish that we could talk to you for a much longer period of time. We have so many cool things that we could delve into, because this book really does. It thrills, it entertains, and it probes deep, and it causes you to really think about what's going on in the world today on so many levels. Now, I know that you already have another book that has come out, 4 Minutes, I believe it's called. And excellent. A friend and another author, John Robinson, told me he is loving that book. So, of course, we're going to recommend that to our listeners. But if you don't mind giving us a little peek what's on your radar, so to speak, what's coming next?
We got a lot of blips on our radar. Our problem is we have wild creative minds, and we shotgun everything out, hoping to stick, and then they all stick, and we have so much work to do. My wife hates that we're so creative. We've got 4 or 5 books coming out this year. The Tier 1 series, which is our tentpole series that sort of launched our brand. The 8th book in that series comes out in July. You mentioned 4 Minutes. We're really, really proud of that book. That's a book that's already been optioned for television with an amazing producer attached. And it's an exciting story. We've got the next Clancy book coming out at the end of the year. We have the next Shepherd's book coming out early next year. Like, there's just always something. I mean, you got to go to the website to see it, because I can't keep it straight in my head.
That's fantastic.
Well, that's what I'm going to tell our listeners about, is how to find you on your website. In fact, Brian, I'm going to start with you, because you're a Vanderbilt grad, as am I, from the law school. So I'm going to start with you.
Go Doors.
That's right. Our listeners can find you at brianandrewsauthor.com. You have a fantastic website. And in fact, there's links to your other projects. And you're also on Facebook, on Goodreads, BookBub, on Twitter. And I know you've maintained a very active social media presence, and listeners will love that. You also have a joint website. Andrews and Wilson can be found at andrews-wilson.com. And it's another excellent site. And Jeff, you can be found on Twitter, Jeffrey Wilson at jwilsonwartorn. And I think that is a wonderful, wonderful way for our listeners to connect with you, to find your excellent books. And we are just so thrilled that you joined us to talk about this one, because we absolutely loved it.
Loved it.
Yeah, and I think the best place to find is just our joint website. That's where it's the most up to date. It has all of our events. So andrews-wilson.com. And if you sign up for our newsletter, we promise we won't spam you. We just give a few updates a year as to our new releases and where we're going to be and what we've got going on. So please sign up so you can stay in touch.
We will. And I'm going to give one last quote to tease our listeners to get this book. Secretary of Defense in the book said, "What if we're at war already and we just don't recognize it?" Oh, there you go. Good reason to pick this book up.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. Pleasure. Hope to see you again.
Definitely, anytime.
Well, Kristen, we love this book. We've been talking about it, and meeting Brian and Jeff was a real pleasure. I mean, as soon as I picked this up, I knew that they had background in the military to be able to have all the resources of this information. And then that they were granted at least elite access just blew my mind. And I just loved everything about it. I thought it's relative, it's current, it's actually educational. It taught us a lot about what's going on in the world today. Just loved everything about it. How about that last comment? What if we're at war already and we just don't recognize it? Somehow I feel that there's some truth in there.
Yes, I absolutely agree. In fact, you and I have talked about this in the past where we think about everyone being so distracted with, what's on TikTok or what's going on Instagram and what the internet world is saying. But there's these underlying currents that are dangerous and concerning, and we need to be paying attention. And so that's why I thought this book did a really good job of, not scaring people, but highlighting things that we need to be paying attention to.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
thank God our military is, right?
Yes. And it's okay to be a little scared because that's kind of fun in this book. How about this quote? Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. I thought
Yes.
that was pretty cool because I
Yes.
love how they gave a nod to Hunt for Red October. We've got Jack Ryan, who was the CIA analyst, who's now the president. We've got his daughter, Katie, who is a Navy analyst, coming in and now solving it in a different generation. And yes, they did. They talked a lot about what happened before and what they could learn from it. Are we a society in a country who's doing that? Or are we repeating the same mistakes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I'm going to add to something you just said. We also, and I'm not going to say who, we see some other characters return in the story, which also was a really cool part of this entire thrill ride. But back to your question. Yeah, I think that we've got a new generation of thinkers who think a little differently than maybe we did, or maybe 2 generations ago, where policy was shaped. And we have to consider those new perspectives in many levels, but including in strategic ones. We can't always predict what other leaders are going to do because guess what? They might think totally different than we do. And to think like we do and assume they do too, we can't do that.
Well
Which,
said,
by the way, was a
Kristen.
theme in this book as well.
Yes, it was.
We could go on and on. What else? We talked a little bit about the technology. I was dazzled. Did you feel that way? It's just so interesting here.
I'll tell you what, I underlined all of these little factoids about submarines. And let me just tell you one that blew my mind, okay? Every 10 meters is 1 bar of pressure for a sub. If the sub goes below their pressure limit, a pinhole leak will be so powerful that it will cut off a person's arm like a laser.
Yeah,
it's like stuff like that just blew my mind.
Absolutely. And that's where I think they really did a great job of picking up in that Tom Clancy tradition because, we loved the Tom Clancy books because they were full of all those incredibly detailed details, but we loved learning them. And that's how this book is too. And by no means is it boring. You are hooked. You want to know what happens next. Absolutely everything that a thriller should be.
And it's real life issues, though. We're talking
Yes.
about nuclear war. So in the book, there was a jacket of cobalt 59 that surrounded a nuclear warhead. The authors described it this way. When it detonates, the metal is transmuted into a highly radioactive cobalt. Its atoms are distributed for miles and miles. Wait to hear this. You'll like this as an environmentalist. It would take a full century before the radiation would reach livable levels. And even at that time, it's 30 times greater than normal.
Yeah.
Those are the weapons that are out there today.
A radioactive tsunami.
Amazing, right?
Yes. In fact, that's what he was talking about as far as Putin putting out an image of what that could look like, this radioactive tsunami coming ashore in Florida. My gosh. But that is in the realm of possibility. And that's why this book was fascinating even on that level.
Mm-hmm. But then you see the heart of Jack Ryan and Katie Ryan, and you see their mettle and their courage and their good moral character. And you know what? Even after all this book, it leaves you with hope. You got hope.
Yeah. Where are those leaders though, Chris? I don't know.
Good overcomes evil. We're not talking about the presidential campaign. We're just saying good overcomes evil. That's all we're going to say.
Well, I want to tell our listeners a little bit about what we have coming up because we have some other very exciting books. We have Emiko Jean with The Return of Ellie Black, Jamie Brenner, A Novel Summer, Kate White, The Last Time She Saw Him, Lisa Barr, The Goddess of Warsaw, Lisa Wingate with Shelterwood, Jill Shalvis, The Summer Escape, and we have the Berry Pickers from Amanda Peters. We have a couple writing duos coming up. We have Preston and Child with Angel of Vengeance, and we have Jeffrey Deaver and Isabella Maldonado with Fatal Intrusion. We cannot wait to talk to those writing duos. And as always, you can find us, listeners. We are on our website, bookstormpodcast.com. You can also find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. We are all over the place. We are on YouTube, where we have some excellent videos. And until next time, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.